Alright, so today I'm going to show you how to just like the basics of planting trees. So I've got an English walnut tree that I grew from some walnuts that my sister picked off her tree down in Cottonwood. And I've never seen a walnut up in Flagstaff, and a walnut tree, but not a nut, and I've seen those before. But I figured I'd give it a try, because from what I've read, they should live up to down to zone 5. And we're over on the east side of town, so it might be more like zone 6 here. So I'm hopeful that it will live and grow. I've got a big elm tree back here that is probably about 60 years old, I would guess. And elm trees tend to get kind of ratty when they get older, so I'm trying to plan ahead so that probably within the next 20 years or so, we're gonna have that tree removed. And I would like to have another tree that's gonna be a large tree growing up underneath it at this point, so that when we remove that tree, we're not gonna have no shade in the backyard. Alrighty, so when you're planting a tree, you wanna go ahead and dig the hole about twice as wide as your pot and as deep. The reason you don't want to dig it deeper, it might be tempting because you would think that the roots would be more easily penetrate down, which would be true, but the downside of that is that the tree will likely settle as that soil compacts more after being disturbed, and then your tree would end up below ground level, which would not be good because soil would probably build up around the base of the tree, which for most trees that's gonna cause a lot of problems. That'll cause usually fungal infections that will kill the tree. So it's real important to plant your tree at the level that it is in the pot, and not any deeper and not any higher either. I have got I've got some compost from our compost bin that I'm gonna go ahead and mix. Oh, and it's got worms in it, this is good. I'm gonna mix this, and rocks, that's less good. I'm gonna mix 50% compost in with our native soil. But the first thing that I'm gonna do before I put this tree in is I am going to fill this hole with water. This is rainwater, collected in a bucket. Rainwater is always best. If you can do it, it's got a little perlite in it because that bucket had soil in it. But you can wait until this soaks in, or you can just go ahead and start planting. So I'm gonna go ahead and take the plant out of the pot. You can cut the pot off if you're real worried about hurting the plant, but usually I will just turn the pot upside down, gently hold the tree, and then tap the pot so that the plant will come out. Ooh, okay, so I've got my tree out. Woo! Can you kind of see that? I know it's a little sunny. Okay, and I've teased the roots out just a little bit at the bottom. If you have a tree that is super root bound, I try and make sure that my trees do not get that way before I pot them into a larger container. But if there are roots that are, if this whole soil ball is just packed with roots and it's real tight, you might want to take a razor blade. I'm gonna set this in here and just cut along each side, and then pull the roots kind of out. So I'm gonna go ahead and plant this because I can't do this. Let's see, I can't do this one-handed, so I'm gonna show you when I'm done. Alrighty, so I went ahead and put my tree in. I did a 50% compost, manure, 50% native soil mix. And then I have top dressed it with the compost manure mix as well. So I went ahead and put probably the last ½ inch is the mix as well. And then I did put a tree well in. I don't know if you can see that very well, but there is a berm that goes all the way around the tree. Some people don't like to do that. I find that here in Flagstaff, if you are trying to water your trees and you don't do that, it's very difficult. You can also do things where you get like those watering pots that you bury with the plant or the tree that you can fill up. But our soil is sometimes very difficult to get to accept our water. It gets kind of hydrophobic. It doesn't want to absorb water once it gets dry. So it is really important that you are finding a way to make sure that you are getting your soil really nice and wet all the way down the length of where the tree roots are. Because otherwise, the plant is just going to grow roots right where there's water, which is going to be probably right near the surface, and it's just going to be weak and it's going to struggle and it's not going to do well. So if you water it really well the first few years, then you can start cutting back on watering it after that, and it's going to, in the long term, make it so you have a much healthier tree. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and mulch with some straw. Again, it's really important that you don't end up with a bunch of this bunched around the base of the plant. So I'm just going to do it like that, and I'm going to go ahead and put it around the area in general. And then I'm going to go ahead and water it really deeply. And the last thing I'm going to do is I've got this bird cage that we pulled out of the trash a few years ago. I'm gonna go ahead and put that over the tree as well. If you have pets, we've got chickens and a dog that are running around back here, and the chickens like to taste everything and the dog likes to sleep everywhere, so we need to protect our plants from things bothering them. So I'll just go ahead and leave that on probably for the first year, depending on how quickly it grows. And then I'll go ahead and bump up to something that's a little taller. You do have to keep an eye on your plants to make sure that you're not stunting their growth with any sort of protective measures that you've put on them. I would also say that I am not a fan of staking trees. It tends to make it so that as soon as you remove the stake, they are not going to be very stable, because when they get blown by the wind, and just moved around in general by, things brushing up against them and stuff, that increases the strength of the stems and the stability of the root system. So if you're not providing that for the tree, if you're not providing that stability artificially, then it's going to develop it naturally. The only caveat to that, I would say, is if you're in an area like Donny Park, or somewhere really exposed and windy like that, then you may end up needing to do that for the first year, but I would suggest not doing it for longer than that. I would also say that, so we're having a really good monsoons right now, and so I'm planting some things. The best time to be planting trees and shrubs, and most perennial plants in Flagstaff, is still going to be in the fall, early winter, because that is going to be the time of year when we have the least amount of wind and the most amount of consistent precipitation, and it just seems to be really good for the plants to be transplanted when it's cool out, and then they have an opportunity to establish their root system, and they tend to come back a lot healthier in the spring. You still have to water them if we have dry winters, which we've been having pretty consistently lately. You'll still want to water like every 2 weeks to once a month. I think those are all of the things that I would want to go over. And just make sure that you keep your trees real well watered when you first put them in. I'll probably end up watering this guy if we don't consistently get rains. I'll probably water this guy once every 2 or 3 days through the season, if I can pay attention. And that'll really get it going. And remember that fertilizing is always a good idea when you first plant. So I'll probably use fish emulsions and Super Thrive when I first get this guy going. And then I'll probably wait another month and go ahead and do that again. I don't usually fertilize once it starts getting later into the season, because I don't want the plants focusing on growing leaves and things. Once it starts getting cold out, I want them to start going dormant. So I will then fertilize again in the spring when things start to break bud or look like they're about to, and then I always try and fertilize around monsoon season as well, even for the established plants. And if you're, willing to do it more regularly than that, it's not a bad idea, depending on what you're using, to go ahead and fertilize like maybe even once a month through the growing season. Maybe more consistently than that if you're using a more mild fertilizer. Just depends on how much time you have. There are options for slow release fertilizers that you can put on your trees and shrubs that you just put them like once a year. I think the only thing I would warn against is you can get these little stakes that you put around your plants and trees and things that are supposed to be a slow release fertilizer, and I would not recommend those, because what tends to happen is the roots grow over to where those stakes are, and that's not necessarily what you want. You want your root system to be nice and evenly spread out. So I would suggest there's like Osmocote if you're okay with. I don't usually use things that are not organic fertilizers, but that's a good option if that's not something you're concerned about, because that'll slow release nitrogen for your plants like through the season, which is really wonderful. But there are other things you can do. You can also make sure that you put manure and compost in and around your plants a couple times a year, to make sure that make sure it's really well composted, and that would be sufficient as well. Just keep an eye on your plants for any signs of stress, because they're not getting particular nutrients. And the more well cared for your plants are, the faster they'll grow, the happier they'll be, the happier you'll be too.